All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out here. Let me just get this set up real quick. How are we looking? All right. Okay, so my name is Andrew Sidor. I'm with Michael Baker International. Just a quick background on myself. I've been involved in the construction stormwater side of things for about the past 7 years. Highly involved in NPDES permitting, construction stormwater compliance, developing stormwater pollution prevention plans, erosion sediment control plans, WPCPs from Caltrans perspective, for a variety of projects, both traditional and LUP type projects, risk level 1 through 3, public projects as well as private land development. So I've seen a lot of things, and hopefully be able to share some of my experience with you guys here today. First and foremost, I think the most important thing to start the presentation off with is a look ahead at the rest of this year, 2017, and into 2018. I think the biggest thing out there looming is the new construction general permit is anticipated to be released for a draft is anticipated to be released in early 2018 for comment. The thing to note with this is that there is potentially a large programmatic changes to the SWIP implementation. And I don't want to get too involved in it here today because, again, nothing's set in stone. It's a draft version, but just wanted to make sure that all of you are aware that there is, after about 10 years, there's finally a new permit coming out. We're not expecting a lot of changes. It's still going to be a risk-based permit, but there will be changes to inspection requirements, sampling protocols, certifications, and stuff of that nature, which could affect your programs. So be aware of that. In the meantime, the current CGP should still continue to be followed until the 2018 permit is fully adopted. Another thing to note going into the rainy season is that NOAA is calling for an above average rainfall this rainy season. Not expecting as much as last year. Last year was a record year, especially coming out of a period of 5 or 6 years of drought, but we are ramping up and expecting a lot of rainfall. So good that you're all here. Get a refresher on the requirements of your programs, a refresher on the BMPs that you guys will be inspecting and following. So be prepared for some rain. And then lastly, I just want to touch that regional boards are starting to become active. So in the first 7 years or so of the permit being implemented, we were in a drought. We didn't see a lot of action from the regional boards. There just wasn't much to inspect. Not a lot of runoff, no sampling data, but now that the state has more funding, pushing that out to the regional boards, we are starting to get rain, discharges from our sites. We're seeing an uptick in activity from regional boards. So what are they looking at? They're looking at smarts infractions. That's the easiest thing to pinpoint. So they'll go in, do their database, and run reports that way. And if we're missing any reporting, they'll come after us there. A big one's failure to submit annual reports. So does everybody here know the reporting period? July 1st through June 30th, and then winter annual reports due September 1st. Great. So hopefully you guys got all those in. We're past that deadline now. We are seeing the regional boards come out with violation letters if you haven't got them in. So be aware of that. We're also seeing random site inspections from the regional boards, typically geared around post-storm. After a rain event, they'll come out and check out sites, higher risk sites, but all sites in general. Be aware that they're out there. They are coming around checking sites randomly. And they're also starting to take a closer look at post-construction plans and our notices of termination. So in the past, it was kind of upload these documents to Smarts. They'll click a button and certify it, and your project will be closed out. But we are seeing more review going into the post-construction plans, checking calcs, making sure that we are meeting our water balances. They're going into the notice of terminations and checking to make sure that the final stabilization is indeed achieved before they pass these on. So kind of a look ahead at 2017, 2018. Going into overview of what I'll cover today, just a brief overview, a reminder of the CGP, Construction General Permit, and then the North Orange County Santa Ana Regional Board MS4 permit, its components and requirements. We'll talk about best management practices for the rainy season, inspection requirements, proactive site management, construction and post-construction coordination, and then we'll end with a project case study. All right, so a brief overview of the CGP. The current permit that we're working under right now was originally drafted in 2009 and adopted in 2010. It's a risk-based permit, so we have different risk levels for our projects based on receiving water risks, sediment risks. Important thing to note here is it was amended in 2012 to remove NELs and receiving water monitoring. So essentially your risk level 3 requirements were removed from the permit. So that's the thing to note there. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the 2018 draft permit coming out in potentially Q1 of 2018. What does the permit cover? The permit covers construction sites with soil disturbance greater than 1 acre in size. And so what we need to point out here, soil disturbance isn't necessarily tied to the overall project footprint. If you are working on a project that is above ground, not disturbing any soil, we don't take that into account when we're doing our calculations for soil disturbance. It also covers projects that are less than 1 acre, but part of a common plan of development. So the idea behind this was they didn't want land developers to come out and piecemeal segment each one of their pads into a separate project, get out permit coverage that way. They have to obtain coverage for their entire site. And again, it covers traditional projects, which are your typical land development projects. Probably most of your projects are falling under the traditional realm, but we also have linear underground and overhead projects. So your transmission lines, any pipeline projects that are spanning over a length. The basis of the permit is to prevent the discharge of pollutants into receiving waters during construction. So the most prevalent pollutant on construction sites is obviously sediment, but we're dealing with oils and greases, petroleum products, paints, concrete, and sediment actually acts as a cohesive binding agent, and so these other pollutants will actually attach to the sediment particles and more readily run off the site. So we're mainly focused on sediment here, but note that we're looking at all pollutants coming off a construction site. Touched on the fact that it's a risk-based permit, and then it has training requirements. So there's QSD, Qualified SWIP Developer, and Qualified SWIP Practitioner, the official designations to implement this permit. So looking at the graphic on the top right, just kind of a review of the different risk levels that we're dealing with. You can see there's two components: the sediment risk, which is based off of project duration. It looks into your site soils, your slopes that you're dealing with. So steeper slopes are going to have higher risk for sediment discharge. It also takes into account your receiving water risk. So what pollutants are named in the receiving water that you're going to be discharging to. Here in North County, the only high-risk receiving water that we have is San Diego Creek and the Newport Back Bay. So if your project's not draining to that, you're most likely going to have a low receiving water risk. If you look below that, we have the breakdown for the LUP type projects. You can see a separate line item in the receiving water line or column. We have a medium. Basically what that means is if you're in a high-risk receiving watershed, but your project is outside of a floodplain, then you can qualify for that medium. You don't automatically go to that high-risk designation. There's some pros and cons between LUP and traditional type projects. So with the LUPs, you get get that extra level of protection before you go to risk type 2. The other good thing about LUPs is that you can segment your projects. So with the traditional project, your entire site's going to be subjected to that particular risk level. Whereas with an LUP, you're going to be spanning, say, several miles of a project. If one portion of that project goes through a high-risk receiving water body, or it becomes risk type 2 or 3, you can segment just that piece to fit the risk type 2 requirements, and the rest of the project can remain risk type 1. The downside with LUP type projects, there is additional reporting. We have daily reports that or daily visual monitoring that we have to do, and then we also have to do third rain event photos documentation. Looking at some of the requirements for the the different risk levels, starting with risk level 1 or risk type 1. Every SWIP that we develop has a set of minimum BMPs, housekeeping BMPs, so trash, waste management, stockpile management, non-stormwater management, so any dewatering that you're going to have on your site, any irrigation, keeping dust down, stuff like that. And then we have our famous erosion and sediment control BMPs, your fiber rolls, silt fence, erosion control products. With the permits, we are required to do a plethora of inspections. We have weekly inspections, pre-storm inspections, which are triggered when there is 50% chance or more of rain in the forecast, during storm inspections, which are triggered after 24 hours of continuous rain in a rain event, post-storm inspections, which are triggered after a half an inch of rain, and then quarterly non-stormwater inspections. Risk level 1s and risk type 1s are required to sample, but not for stormwater sampling. We are doing non-visible pollutant sampling. And then there is the fact that we have annual reporting due every September 1st. Risk type 2 and 3, we are dealing with all the risk level 1 requirements with the addition of rain event action plans, which is basically a more robust form of our pre-storm inspection. It's going out there, looking at the site, making sure that all your BMP contractors are aware of what's of the pending storm, what their requirements are going to be, taking a full look at the site, what activities are going on, how we're going to prepare for the rain event. And then we'll be sampling for stormwater, or we'll be doing stormwater sampling for pH and turbidity, and we'll be dealing with numeric action levels, which is shown in this table here. The NALs for pH are between 6.5 and 8.5, so if you're outside of that range, you have an exceedance. Turbidity is greater than 250 NTUs. What that means, if we exceed it, we will upload the data to SMARTS, and then at that point it's up to the board if they want to enforce an exceedance action report. Very seldom do they come out with that, but just be aware that if we do have an exceedance, it's not an automatic slap on the wrist. It's just a wake-up call that we will potentially get a notification from the regional board, and that we should be looking to correct the site or any problems that we have on the site. CGP training requirements, so SWPs, Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plans, must be developed by a qualified SWP developer. What this entails is a 3-day training course. You have to pass the QSD exam, which is basically just an exam on the construction general permit, all the ins and outs of the permit, and then you must have an underlying certification. So Certified Professional Erosion Sediment Control, your PE licensure will get you there. To implement a SWP, you have to have a qualified SWP practitioner, or a QSP. A little bit more lenient than the QSD route. It only requires a 2-day training course, the QSP exam, and an underlying certification such as the CESWI, Certified Erosion Stormwater Inspector, CISIC. So a little less experience, more of the practical side, less of the development side. If you're interested in more information on how to obtain licensure, I've included a link here for your needs. All right, jumping into the Santa Ana Region MS4 permit requirements. It's pretty verbose up on the screen. I'm just going to read through it, but most of you should be familiar with this. This is the same permit you've been working with over the years, so should sound all familiar to you. Hopefully you guys are implementing, or you should be implementing what's outlined here. But Section 8 of your permit states that construction activities must be consistent with a model construction program that you guys have developed, maintaining an updated inventory of your construction sites, of your active construction sites. You need to prioritize your sites as either high, medium, or low threat to water quality. And there is a stipulation that regulates what automatically qualifies as a high priority project. Any project that's over 20 acres in size automatically qualifies as a high priority project. If the project acreage is between 5 and 20 acres, then you're classified as a medium level project, and then you work your way down to low. And there is draft language out there that they will be looking into kind of aligning the priority scheme with the CGP, in that you'll be looking at receiving waters, kind of how what your site sediments or soils are, slopes, project size, stuff like that, to go into to prioritize the sites even further. The permit also requires that we conduct inspections that are consistent with the constitutions of California and the United States, compliance with its ordinances, again, our model construction program, and the construction runoff guidance manual, which is included here on the graphic here. Continuing on, so we have a checklist, or you should have developed a checklist, an inspection checklist that includes the verification of the CGP, the WDID number, if the project that you're inspecting does have CGP coverage. If it doesn't, we just need to be identifying the erosion control plan, making sure that the BMPs called out in that plan are adequate for the phase of construction, for the season that we're in, just making sure that all the BMPs are accounted for. We'll have a section on visual observations of non-stormwater discharges, the determination of compliance with ordinances, post-construction requirements, and then obviously the most important thing when you guys are out there, the assessment of BMPs on site. The permit goes on to explain the inspection frequencies. So in this permit, the definition of the dry season is officially May 1st through September 30th. And your inspection frequency would be sufficient enough to determine that you're basically in compliance. You have no sediment discharges, any other pollutants, stormwater discharges getting off site. For the wet season, October 1st through April 30th, high priority projects are once a month, medium priority projects twice per wet season, and low priority projects once per wet season. And this is the bare minimum, remember. I highly encourage more active inspections. It's always good to get out there once a rainy season, twice a rainy season, even if the project's low risk. Just doesn't seem enough. The construction changes daily. The activities change daily. There's always something that's going to go wrong. So especially with the uptick in the regional board involvement, I highly encourage more active participation and more active inspections on these sites. The permit also requires that we have consistent enforcement for non-compliant sites. We have to have enforcement of ordinances and permits at construction sites, modifying our local implementation plans to identify enforcement linkage to the regional board. Sanctions, so in a written enforcement order at the time of the inspection, and then any other appropriate actions that we need to have the contractor follow. If we need to notify the regional board immediately or within 24 hours if there's an imminent threat to human health or the environment. Otherwise, we have a 5-day grace period. A big one here is respond to third-party complaints in a timely manner. So I think you guys as the cities are at an advantage in that if you guys receive a complaint, it's kind of a warning. A lot of the public, we do see a lot of complaints coming from the public, but they're not aware that they can go straight to the regional boards. They come to you guys first, and it's up to you guys to correct that prior to the regional boards coming out. So I think you guys are at an advantage. Make sure you're responding to their complaints in a timely manner before they go to the regional boards, and we have a real problem. And then training of inspectors. You guys are here at the training, probably come to this training once a year, so just making sure you're staying abreast of all the new permit caveats that are coming out, getting a refresher on everything once a year. And I threw in some links here to the resources, the MS4 permit that you guys are working under, and then OC Watersheds has a great website here with different documentation, different templates that you can use, guidance on BMPs, but a really kind of one-stop shop that you guys can utilize for your construction projects. Are there any questions on the CGP or the MS4 before we move on? All right. So I want to talk about rainy season BMPs. We're all aware of best management practices, but I wanted to focus primarily on what we can do in preparation for the rainy season. So I think the biggest thing on construction sites is focusing on stabilization early on. And so the preservation of existing vegetation should be our number one key. The less we can disturb, the more success we're going to have with retaining sediment on site, reducing erosion. I also get that it's not entirely practical to schedule all of construction outside of the rainy season. The bird nesting season, which kind of governs over everything and halts construction more often than not, is February through August. That gives us the rainy months to go into to start grading. So it's kind of converse to what logic would say. We don't want to be grading during the rainy months, but the truth or the reality is that we are exposing large amounts of sediment during the rainy season. So work with the contractors, understand their schedules, track the forecasts, the weather forecasts religiously, and make sure that you are coordinating to the extent possible that you can to minimize what's exposed to the weather. Also, I think a huge thing is stockpiling BMPs on site. So you go out to a construction site, they don't have enough BMPs, BMPs get thrashed, or you have a violation. During the rainy season, it's hard to come by BMPs in some of the time periods that you need them. 48 hours to get 6,000 linear feet of fiber roll on a slope. It's probably not going to happen. So I really encourage the contractors and you guys to push the stockpiling of BMPs on site for quick deployment. And then we just need to have constant inspection and maintenance. So touching on the importance of pre-storms and rain event action plans, that's the key. If we can stop the problem before it happens, that's going to save money and time in the long run. Note that sediment is going to build up. BMPs will get damaged more frequently during the rainy season. So again, going back to that point of making sure that we have adequate supplies on hand that can be deployed quickly. And then during storm inspections, provide truth. And so a common thing, construction shuts down when it's raining. Sites aren't accessible. You can't do any work in the rain. So what happens is a lot of times inspectors aren't out there. But in my experience, I think going out when it's raining is the most valuable time that you can inspect the site, because that's when you actually see where the water's coming from, where it's going, how the BMPs are reacting to the flows. So I highly encourage you to get out there if it's safe, if you have access to the site, to inspect the site during a rain event to find out how the BMPs are reacting and where you can make improvements. But jumping into actual BMPs, starting with erosion control. So erosion control is hands down the most important thing you can do on the site. We have our typical sediment controls. You see all the fiber rolls, silt fence, gravel bags, all that stuff looks pretty. That's what we kind of think about when we think about BMPs, but really erosion control accounts for about 85% of the success rate that we have on construction sites. If we can secure the soil, prevent erosion and sediment discharge from the source, it's going to help us in the long run. So main focus should be given on erosion control. A reminder from the permit, temporary stabilization measures are required on disturbed project areas prior to the onset of rain or within 14 days of inactivity. So the first one that I put on here is one of my favorites, is soil binders. You can reference it in the Casca BMP fact sheets as EC5. But what it is, it's a liquid that's sprayed onto a site, onto soils, and it forms a protective crust. And it's going to prevent raindrop erosion, or splash erosion, so when the raindrop hits the ground, it's going to hold the sediment intact. It also provides a pretty good cover for sheet flow coming across your slopes. The benefit of this is it has a minimized curing time, less than 24 hours. A product that I really like to use is called EarthGuard Reap. They state that you can apply it during a rain event. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I've done it in less than probably 2 hours prior to a rain event, and it hardens onto the slope, and it works really well. Easy application. You can put it into a water truck. You don't have to get the huge hydroseeding trucks out there with the hoses. You can put it in a water truck, mix it, and just spray it on the site. So very easy application, very quick curing time, relatively inexpensive. The only downside is that you're not going to get a lot of extended use off of it. You're going to get maybe 1 to 2 storms depending on how thick of the application rate that you put on. The best use for soil binders is going to be slopes or disturbed areas that are likely to lay inactive. What you don't want to do is you don't want to go out to a slope or a disturbed area that, say, you need to protect prior to the rain event, but then the contractor is going to come and do some grading right after the rain event, because that's just going to destroy the binder that's on the soil. It's kind of for naught. So areas that are finished, that are awaiting final stabilization, a great product to use, soil binders. Another great product would be geotextiles or mats, BMP fact sheet EC7. Also, we refer to them as visqueen covers. Quick solution for when curing times aren't available. So if you don't have the soil binders stockpiled on site or readily available, and there's impending rain events, if you have plastic sheeting on site, you can throw that down relatively quickly. It's a little bit more robust. It's going to last a little bit longer than the soil binders, just the thickness of the material. We prefer to use natural products, so jute netting. You can see in the top right picture we have jute netting coming down the slope. Coconut coir are preferred because they're biodegradable. We can leave them on site and then just walk away essentially with the slopes stabilized. But visqueen is acceptable. The CGP, the permit, will allow for plastic. They specifically state, the permit language states that it's minimize the use of plastics where applicable, but it is acceptable. But one thing to note with covers is that they must be securely installed. And so obviously when it's raining, we often experience winds and it picks up the covers. So just make sure that when you guys are using the plastics, it's securely fastened to the ground. We don't want to cause any extra hazards out there. These are more for your active areas that need temporary protection, so stockpiles is a good one. You need to cover it prior to a rain event. You don't want to put a soil binder down because after the rain event you're going to come and disturb it again, so just cover it real quickly with some plastic. Slopes that you're going to be continuing to grade, use plastic over a soil binder. Moving into more of a temporary to permanent control, we have hydraulic mulch or a bonded fiber matrix, BFM, BMP Casca fact sheet EC3. What this is it's a wood or paper fiber that's bound with a kind of a cohesive tackifier unit, and that's going to be sprayed on the ground similar to a hydroseed or a soil binder. It comes out a lot thicker. It kind of looks like wet cotton candy that's just like slapped on the ground. It's pretty thick, looks messy, but holds up really well. This will last a lot longer than soil binders. You can get an entire rainy season out of it, even longer. The downside is it does take a longer time to cure, 24 to 48 hours in most cases. It is applied via a hydroseed truck. This is best used for large, long-term areas that need to be stabilized. So if you guys are coming to an end of a project and you need to stabilize some slopes, a BFM is a good choice. With that being said, it's not accepted as a form of vegetation for final coverage. So if you are trying to terminate a SWIP through the 70% coverage method, the BFM won't work. However, we have had successful routes using Russell 2. So if you guys are familiar with the revised universal soil loss equation, it's a different method that you can use in the CGP to close out coverage. Basically, it's a calculation that determines how much sediment yield you're having from your construction site. And so the BFM product meets those calculations. So in a way, it can be used for final stabilization and NOT closeout. Permanent erosion control BMPs, we're looking at hydroseed and wood mulch. So this is hydroseeding. It's best when it's combined with a mulch or tackifier. We don't want to just spray seed on a slope. It's not going to stay in place. After one rain event, it's just going to get washed away. So make sure if they are hydroseeding a site, they have some kind of tackifier in there, something to hold it in place. The timing of this is critical. So more often than not, construction projects will finish during the summer, and we'll see contractors go out and hydroseed a slope in the middle of summer and then walk away with no water source. And I don't know how you're going to get any growth without any water. Ideally, you'd apply it in the rainy season, take advantage of the rain that you can get. Otherwise, if you're going to apply hydroseed, make sure that you have some kind of water source on it, at least for the first month or two until you have some vegetation coming through. But we need to have actual growth coming through in order to NOT a project. The last one, wood mulch, it's a great product, very expensive, but instantaneous closeout. You spray it on and you can get closeout from the CGP. All right, so moving into sediment controls. So these are probably the ones that you're most familiar with. But again, erosion control is number one. 85% of your success rate is going to come from erosion control. The last 15% is sediment control. And I think that's converse to what our knowledge tells us. I mean, we go out to these sites and we see tons of gravel bags, extra fiber rolls, but really they're our last line of defense. We can't rely on them to keep all the sediment on site. If we have a huge slope failure, a lot of sediment running down, and these BMPs are just going to get overwhelmed and we're going to have to replace them. So minimize what you can at the source and then come and use sediment controls as your last line of defense. So looking at this picture, we have our standard inlet protection, we have silt fence, gravel bags, fiber rolls, stuff that you guys are familiar with. Coming into some other ones, my personal favorite is the cutback curb. And so if you're familiar with SE3 sediment traps, the cutback curb is kind of like a mini sediment trap. A lot of home developers use this where they'll grade down about 3 to 4 inches behind the curb and essentially form a mini sediment trap for each one of their housing lots. So this saves a lot of, I guess, overall BMP maintenance. Instead of installing silt fence, they just have that extra holding capacity behind the curb. So that's a good one to use. Storm drain inlet protection, another good one to use. However, we're seeing more and more often requirements to remove this during the rainy season because of flooding issues. So if that's the case, we typically like to have the filter fabric down and the gravel bags blocking it during to catch dry weather flows or any dust. But then prior to a rain event, we'll want to make sure that we're pulling that back, not impeding any water. But if we do that, we need to make sure that we're, again, controlling the source. So if we're taking the control away from our discharge point, we're going to have to make up for it somewhere else. Maybe we'll have an extra perimeter control going on our site. We have our fiber rolls, straw wattles, silt fence, I guess a combination, something we can use in place of a silt fence would be Urtec S fence. I think it's a relatively new product, but it's very robust. It's a lot better than silt fence. I think it's cheaper, easier to install, and you can get a lot more use out of it. I've seen people pull it out at the end of a construction site, shake it out, and then use it on a different site, completely different site. So Urtec S fence is a good option to look into. Gravel bags and then sediment basins. The reminder with sediment basins, they're great. It retains most of the discharges from our site, but beware that they have to be sized correctly. CASCA has a fact sheet that has to be followed. The CGP specifically states that we have to follow the CASCA sediment design guidelines. I know cities have their own guidelines on sediment basins, but CASCA is going to supersede unless the city's requirements are more stringent. I threw this top picture on here. Is pretty cool. It's not the best because it does show rilling going down the access road there, but just something to be aware of when you're going out and inspecting BMPs. You know, you can see the fiber roll there along the face of the slope, and then we have the silt fence at the toe. That's kind of common knowledge, but what we sometimes overlook when we're looking at BMPs on a plan set and not actually out in the field is that this is actually creating a problem. So we have water that's going to concentrate because the access road is sloping down against the slope there. We're going to concentrate flows along the backside of the silt fence, and that's more of a problem than not having the silt fence there in the first place. So how do we mitigate that? We install silt fence check dams every so often down. So you're going to have the water concentrating along the backside of the silt fence. You're going to be protecting the hillside, but then you're also going to be having check dams to slow and break up the concentrated flow path as it goes down the access road. A reminder that the permit, essentially any run-on that's going onto your site is you own it, so best to divert it around your site as much as possible. If not, making sure it's clean when it comes on, clean when it goes off. So how can you do that? You can have diversions, gabions, you can pipe it through your system, or just have a robust system of perimeter controls to make sure that everything coming onto your site is as clean as possible. So this is a couple pictures that we don't want to be. We don't want our silt fence, that murky water coming over and going straight into the storm drain. That's a big no-no. It's just the public can see that, and that's going to raise a lot of issues. All right, any questions on BMPs? All right. All right, so moving into inspections, the purpose of the inspections, we want to identify the BMP, or identify and correct BMP failures, but we want to go a step further, and we want to be forward-thinking. We want to be able to identify and correct potential failures as well. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a lot cheaper and time efficient to identify problems before they start. So when you're going out to these sites, don't just look for something that's happened in the past, but look for areas that might be a potential source for failure in the future. Paying attention to where sediment's building up, or if you see a rill forming, make sure that we're addressing that before it becomes a larger issue. And then obviously we have to do this as part of the MS4 permit that we're working under. What are we inspecting? We're inspecting areas that haven't achieved final stabilization. We're going to be inspecting our erosion and sediment control BMPs, our housekeeping BMPs. So this is a thing that's commonly overlooked. We go out there thinking, okay, we need to check the sandbags, the gravel bags, make sure they're all buttoned up, but we fail to look at the contractor's yard, and that's one of the main sources of pollutants, where the equipment's parked, making sure that everything underneath the equipment is clean, there's no leaks or spills, proper trash pickup on sites. So really going into the nitty-gritty, the housekeeping issues is equally important on sites. And then record keeping. We also need to be cognizant of the record keeping that the contractor is doing. So are they completing their inspection reports? We mentioned that the CGP requires weekly inspections. Is the contractor doing this? And is it stored in the on-site SWIP? Are they producing the training that they need to? Anytime a new contractor comes on site, they need to be trained, and that documentation should be kept in the SWIP. Are there any amendments to the SWIP? Has the SWIP expiration or has the SWIP expired? Should they have done a COI to extend coverage? Have they removed any project areas? So all that stuff should be kept in the SWIP. The SWIP is a living document. It needs to be updated consistently, and it needs to reflect the exact site conditions. So when you're going out there, look at the site map on the wall. Make sure the BMPs that are called out there are match in the field. All right, so how do we inspect? I know we become creatures of habit, but the most important thing is safety first. And so the CGP went in there and actually put statements in there saying that if you feel unsafe at any time, you don't have to go out and inspect. You just need to fill out an exemption record. So we all want to go home at the end of the day, make sure that you are conducting these inspections safely. And I think that starts with when you get on site, make sure you always check in with the construction site manager. It's not only courteous to do that, they want to know who's on their site, who's walking around, but I think you can get a lot of valuable information out of the construction site manager when you get out there. It's probably been a while since you were last on site. Conditions might have changed, construction activities might have changed. It's good to walk through and ask for any additional hazards, any areas that are off limits that you can't go and walk and inspect. Also ask if they can escort you. I think that's very, very valuable. You know, we're going out there as inspectors just looking for BMP failures, but you might not know kind of the phasing or the justification behind the contractor. The contractor's job is to construct the site and maintain compliance. Our job is to maintain compliance, and we don't oftentimes align the two. So if you can kind of walk the site with the construction site manager, find out what their current activities are, and then gear the BMPs around that, I think that's very valuable. So review the site plan when you're out there, review the SWIP, discuss any updates to the project since the last inspection. You want to start by walking the perimeter of the site, making sure all the perimeter controls are in place. That's our last line of defense. Anything that's going to get past that, then it's out of our control, and at that point we can get violations. So start by walking the perimeter of the site, look for any signs of discharge, any deterioration of BMPs. Start from the downstream end and then work your way up. It's easier to trace back to a source of pollutant from the downstream, working your way back up. Note any evidence of or the potential for pollution to leave the site. Take multiple photos of each item that you inspect. So what I always do when I go out is I'll take 2 photos. If I see a deficiency, I'll take a zoomed out version showing some easy to identify landmarks. So that way, the second picture I'll take will be a zoomed in version. So for example, say there's an oil leak on the ground. I'll take a picture showing where it's located on the site and then a picture of the actual oil leak. So that way when I follow up with the contractor, I can say, okay, there's an oil leak in the southwest corner, here's where it's located. I'm not just giving them a picture of an oil leak on the ground, then making them go find out where they need to clean it up. And then take thorough field notes. Always good to document everything that you see on a construction site. Cover your own. Key inspection locations. So again, talking about the site perimeter, we want to look at all disturbed areas. The laydown yard, again, a very big component of it. You can see a lot of these pictures here where we're taking in the laydown yard. You've got your concrete washout, your trash buildup, things that we kind of overlook. The porta potty there, be aware that, you know, it has to be within or outside of 50 feet of a concentrated flow path. It's something that we don't commonly, or we commonly overlook. So make sure that we're inspecting the laydown yards, all conveyances and inlets and discharge points. Key items to inspect, so all structural BMPs. The bottom left picture is kind of funny, but you can see that there was probably a deficiency in the silt fence, that it had a gap in it, so you're probably getting some sediment leaving there. I don't know what the recommendation was, but somebody went out and tried to repair it, and they just put some silt fence in front of it. But you're still going to have water running around. So make sure we're inspecting all structural BMPs. We want to look at slopes, going back again to the importance of making sure that everything's staying on the slopes. That's our first line of defense. Stockpiles, solid waste storage areas, sanitary facilities, equipment and vehicles, and then concrete washout. Any experiences from you guys that you want to share with what you've seen out on sites, or any questions on inspections? Okay. All right, so let's get into managing a site proactively. I think this can save a lot of money, a lot of headaches if done properly. So the first thing that you want to do is really understand the permits. And I know this permit's been around for 9 years or so, or 7 years or so. You have your programs in place, you have everything that you've been doing for the past years, but note that there's always gray areas. There's always different interpretations. Different regional board inspectors, there's turnover in staff, there's different things going on, and so there's always going to be different interpretations. So make sure that you understand the caveats of the permits, what different types of inspectors, how they interpret things, and just really understand that. Another thing that I encourage, if you have the time, is joining the CASCA Construction Subcommittee. So this is a subcommittee that has a conference call once every 2 months, and they'll discuss the inner workings of the permit, any gray areas that come up from discussion, any changes that might come in the 2018 permit. They'll go over that kind of stuff and keep you updated on what their interpretations are from experience working with cities, working with the counties, working with regional boards. So you might find some good tips in those calls, and it's free to join. The next thing is take the permits seriously. Enforcement actions and fines are real, and I think the latest example of that is the city of San Diego. Last year was fined $4.5 million. They fortunately got that reduced down to $3.2 million, but that's still a lot of money. And the important thing for us to know as the city agencies, a lot of these fines are often passed back to the contractor for negligence and not following the spec language. But this fine in particular was issued to the city of San Diego for programmatic errors and inspection shortcomings. So the fines are out there, they're real, and they will come after cities as well. And this one, I don't think that they can pass off any of the fines to contractors, because this was due to their own negligence. And then just to have a reminder that all this information is made public, and it's out there. So everything that we do is uploaded to SMARTS. There's talk about making all inspection records a requirement to be uploaded to SMARTS. Currently, we just have to upload the SWIP, any amendments to SMARTS, but going into the 2018 permit, we might be doing every single inspection report. And so any Joe Schmo off the street can go into the public database on SMARTS, look up a construction site, see that you're missing information, and file a claim against you. And it's also easy for people to trace back murky water, look at a dust cloud and trace it back to your site. So the public is out there. They are getting more involved, and they aren't afraid to speak up. All right, so we want to get involved and we want to stay involved. And our involvement in the CGP, or construction stormwater, begins at the planning stages of the project. So when possible, we should be sitting down with the contractor. We should be looking at the plan. We should be reviewing the plan, meeting with the QSP, forming a relationship with the contractor's QSP early on, making sure that we understand where they're coming from, what their understanding of the permit is, what their plan, what their schedule, the phasing of construction is going to be, but really getting a game plan from the beginning of construction. And then our role will develop over time, and we'll continue to oversee during construction and then all the way to project completion. But communication is the key here. We need to understand schedules, again, going back, working with the contractor. We want to pick our battles. We definitely need to be in compliance, don't get me wrong, but we also need to make compromises. So a lot of times as inspectors we'll go out and we'll understand BMPs, what the requirements are for BMPs, but we won't understand that you got to have some sway and leeway with construction schedules. So maybe it doesn't make sense to put a fiber roll on the slope because they're going to be disturbing it. Having that discussion with the contractor, finding a compromise, maybe that they're not putting that sediment control on the slope, but they're going to put a control somewhere else downstream of the project to equalize that. So make sure that we're working together. We're a team out there. We want to maintain compliance. Obviously, we have budgets that we're working with, so take that into consideration. We also don't want to become creatures of habit. So for me personally, like when I'm going out to the construction sites on a weekly basis, I think you guys are inspecting a lot less frequently, but a lot doesn't change. There's not much that changes week in, week out. So you tend to see the same BMPs week after week. You tend to get into kind of a routine, and that's a sign for missing things. So if possible, send a different inspector out there every other month. Get a new, fresh set of eyes out there. Somebody that's not familiar with the project, they can go out and pick the project apart, find different BMPs that you may have missed. Walk a different route. It's as simple as that. So instead of walking clockwise, maybe you walk counterclockwise, but it should be your job to find something wrong every inspection. Doesn't have to be something big, but it should be a goal to find something wrong, because there's always going to be at least one thing wrong. If you're walking away from a construction site and everything is great, then you'll probably miss something. And then going back to the importance of inspecting the site during a rain event, even if construction's canceled. I can't stress that enough. It's very valuable. If you get out there when it's raining, you'll see what I'm talking about there. We always want to have thorough documentation, so making sure that we're taking photos of everything, notes during every inspection. Send follow-up emails summarizing your findings, so rather than just go straight into the compliance issues, just make sure you're keeping an open line of communication with the contractor. We want to identify completion dates, and we want to record any exemption. So a big thing is if we aren't going out and we're not doing sampling because it's outside of business hours, or say an electrical storm that's unsafe, we need to be documenting that. The board will come back and say, hey, your annual report, we had 6 storm events, you only sampled 3, where were the other 3? So we need to have records showing that we were exempt from sampling those events. Understand what the regional boards are looking for. So in the past, they kind of go after the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that's easy to identify. Before they got the extension in their budgets, they would do a lot of desk jockeying. They would be looking at data on smarts. They can do that from their desk. Looking at post-construction plans, annual reports, stuff that they can queue out in their smarts database and say, X city hasn't submitted annual reports for this many projects. We're going to go after them. So that's the first thing that they're going to be looking for. So make sure that your smarts, your reporting is all up to date, you're getting your reports in on time. But now we're seeing a lot more drive-bys and a lot more activity from regional boards and inspectors getting out to these construction sites. So be aware, they are out there. what I can tell you there is make sure that you don't have any dust clouds going up, you don't have any track out, because they'll trace it back to your construction sites. And once they're on your construction sites, they're going to be a lot harder than you are on the contractor. They're going to be they're going to be turning over rocks and looking for serious issues. So if you can keep them off your site to the extent possible, great, but be aware that they are coming out. And then the last thing is just really be clear in your specifications and your contract language. BMP implementation can go awry really quickly. A lot of times when we develop these erosion sediment control plans, we have a lump sum for BMPs, but what we fail to realize is that BMPs are going to get damaged. They're going to, different phases of the project are going to need different BMPs. So who's responsible for that? Is it the contractor that's going to be responsible for implementing something if they break it, if somebody else breaks it, if the public breaks it? So making sure that your specifications and contract language is clear is a key. Any questions on site management? All right, so I'll briefly go through this. I know Brent's going to talk about this. He has some pretty good examples, but one of the issues that we're seeing with our sites during construction is post-construction BMPs. So I'm talking water quality basins, any like pervious pavements that are going in, something that needs infiltration, biofiltration. We need optimal site conditions. We need the soils to be able to infiltrate. And so when we're going in and we're doing construction, typically we'll compact soils down. We'll be driving equipment where we shouldn't be. We will be adding extra sediment that's going to clog the pore spaces of these proposed post-construction BMPs. So it's another thing for us as inspectors when we're out on sites to understand what these post-construction BMPs are, where they're located, how they work, and how we can mitigate any issues arising from construction into post-construction. So yeah, looking at the examples, so a water quality basin going in. You're going to have constant traffic from vehicles going back and forth. It's going to compact down the soils, reducing infiltration capacity. You're going to have sediment coming down that you're storing from a rain event. The fines in the sediment runoff is going to clog the infiltration capacity of the water quality basin. So how can we mitigate that? We can discourage the access by putting up ESA fencing or some kind of designation saying, okay, you can't, once we've graded this basin, you can't access it. If we are going to use it for temporary sediment control, just make sure it's lined so we're not clogging up the soil underneath. Porous pavement, scheduling here is a big one, and I know Brent will talk about that. So just make sure that when you are putting in pavements, if there is active construction going on, we have proper BMPs in place, perimeter control BMPs, sediment control BMPs to prevent as much sediment running off into these streets, clogging the pavement. Any questions on post-construction? All right, so we'll look at a case study project. This happened last February. It's a pretty large project, traditional project. It was a roadway expansion project, roadway expansion and improvements. 34-acre site located in San Clemente, which is Regional Board 9, San Diego region. It was a risk level 2 project, and the construction activities included demolition, grading of cut and fill slopes, wet and dry utilities, paving, and final stabilization. So in February, we had a pretty large storm event, and we received 2 different complaints. We had one complaint from the city, which was enacted by the public. There had been some sediment discharges onto an adjacent property, and so they had contacted the city. The city came out, did an inspection, saw that, hey, yeah, they are right. There's a lot of sediment coming from this construction site onto this private property. We also had a random post-storm drive-by by one of the regional boards. Luckily, they didn't go onto the site, but they drove by and they noticed risk level 2 project was missing a lot of BMPs, no slope controls, especially prior to a rain event. There was exposed soils. There was missing BMPs. BMPs were damaged. So pretty much everything that could go wrong went wrong, and we got an enforcement action from the regional board. Luckily, there were no fines or violations issued. It was just a comprehensive documentation that they wanted to see. They gave us basically a 72-hour window to get corrections out there. I mean, 72 hours on a 34-acre site prior to the next rain event is still just a time crunch. So here's some photos. The left photo shows one of those on-site sediment basins. You can see that sediment's starting to build up. I mean, that's the purpose of a sediment basin, to hold sediment, but you can see the erosion going down into the basin. In this particular basin, the outlet riser was clogged, so there was no area for water to discharge. It was just going to fill up, and then you're going to have water running over the side, over the spillway, and discharging sediment. You can look at the middle photo here. We have our tow protection with the silt fence, but being a risk level 2 project, we're required to have face controls, linear barriers along the face, so we're missing that. And then the far right picture shows what probably started as a small rill, but after a couple storm events turned into a massive, massive gully. I mean, you can look at the little dude walking around there, and size comparison, how deep that thing was. Pretty serious. Looking at these, so the furthest left is kind of the perimeter of the project, culvert going under the roadway there, but you can just see the amount of sediment that's building up and clogging this culvert, but really no BMPs in place. All that sediment's running off onto private property. Terrible. We can't have that. The middle photo, in the foreground, we were showing just some rilling and some erosion happening along that slope. And then if you look at the large slope in the back, you can see that it's completely missing any face controls. No sediment BMPs. I mean, that's probably a 2-to-1 slope, if not steeper, and the permit requires for risk level 2 that face controls be installed every 10 feet. We have nothing. And then the far right picture shows kind of an outlet structure, but you can see that no water's getting directed into the pipe. It's all diverted around. It's creating major erosion, and it's decreasing the integrity, or it's hurting the integrity of that system right there. So very, very terrible site. And it kind of goes back to to us as not only, I mean, the first line of defense is going to be the QSP, the contractor's QSP, but us as inspectors, how do we let stuff like this go, especially in the rainy season? So we need to be aware, we need to be proactive, we need to be on top of it. The left picture here shows a nicely track-walked slope. Track walking is great. It's going to break up your concentrated flow paths, but again, we don't have any tow protection. We don't have any top of slope protection. Just a bare slope. In the rainy season, 48 hours prior to a rain event, you get rain, that slope's going to come down. You can kind of see on the far left, there's obviously erosion there. The right picture is kind of a different example. So this is a finished slope that they had hydroseeded, but the contractor didn't follow the specifications, and they installed was it plastic wrapped fiber roll. And so when we submitted the NOT for that section, the board made us required us to remove the plastic fiber roll. Well, we didn't get the stabilization from the seeding that we needed prior to the rain event, and you can see that erosion started to happen along the slope there. So what we could have done there, conversely, is install the burlap wrapped fiber rolls. Those can be left in place long term. They'll biodegrade over time, but that would have been the solution there. In this case, we had to go out, have them rework the slope, compact it, reseed, reinstall the burlap wrapped fiber rolls. But a case of something that can that can happen is you think a slope's done, it's been hydroseeded, but it's not fully stabilized until it's actually stabilized. So what did we do? We didn't make excuses. We got together as a team. We did a comprehensive site review. We involved the contractor, the contractor's QSP, county personnel, county inspectors, all met together, got in the same room, kind of went through the permit requirements, what were the shortcomings, and put a game plan together, all within 72 hours. So we realized that 72 hours wasn't enough time to get this all implemented within or prior to the next storm event. So what we did was we came together with a game plan to identify the immediate threats, something that, or the stuff that's most important that we could address before the next rain event. That's cleaning of the clogged storm drains, removing sediment buildup in the basins and behind controls, giving us extra capacity for the next rain event. Installing the sediment controls along the inactive slopes, because that was a huge comment from the regional board, and then adding temporary stabilization to active slopes. And you can see in this photo here, let's see, there we go. The left picture is a good example of working with the contractor. So they, after talking, we told them, okay, you're going to have to stabilize this entire slope. They said, we're still actively working it. After this storm event, we're going to go out there and we're going to be regrading it. So we said, okay, well, what can we do to minimize the potential for sediment to come off this slope? And so what we settled on was building a berm along the edge of the road there and directing all the water down to the spillway that was, you can see the Visqueen spillway there. So instead of having the water run off directly down the slope into the culvert there, we directed it towards the spillway, and then we had additional BMPs at the bottom. So not necessarily permit specific, but it was a compromise that we were willing to make in order to keep construction going and meet compliance. The picture on the right there shows a slope that they were actively working, so they chose not to hydroseed it or put a soil binder on it. They decided to put plastic down, an enormous amount of plastic, but that's what they wanted to do. They figured it was more cost effective to be able to put the plastic down and then rip that out and then go back to grading it rather than applying soil binder every 5 days, because it seemed like we were getting rain every 5 days last year. These two pictures here, so the left shows the application of soil binder. So this was an area that they were not going to touch for a while. They decided to go with the soil binder there to secure it. And then the picture on the right shows the application of hydromulch, an area that was going to be untouched for even longer. So they decided to go the more expensive route, something that's a little bit more robust, but put the hydromulch down. So what are the lessons learned from this? The public and the regional boards do respond. Again, just touching on that, or the fact that everything's shared publicly on smarts, and construction sites do automatically have a target on their back. A recent example that I have was there was a home development project going in, and there were some discharges into a lake with some pollutants. And so the homeowners association came straight after. They didn't even look into the source of water. They just assumed it was coming from the construction site. And they met with the contractor and said, hey, you guys are polluting our lake. We have you're killing the fish. But we went out there, we did our due diligence. We traced the water back upstream, and it was actually another home development upstream that was overwatering their lawns for the grand opening of their development. And so all the fertilizers coming off in the dry weather flow into their lake. So the homeowners association didn't even bother to look at the real issue. They came directly after construction because automatically they're going to assume that there's pollutants coming from a construction site. So always have that in the back of your mind. We also learned that enforcement actions, even when there aren't fines associated with them, they can be expensive. The additional BMPs that we had to have out there and the labor, we had to get all these BMPs in within 72 hours. So there was a lot of people working overtime, coming out, trying to find, 10,000 feet of fiber roll in 3 days. It's an enormous amount of effort. And so, fix your sites or forecast potential problems up front because when you're correcting an issue later on, it's going to be more expensive. Contractor coordination can be difficult. Make sure that your specifications are clearly written and you're having open communication. Again, just going back, working with the contractor, making sure we're in compliance, making sure we're all in agreement. Be proactive and not reactive. Stockpile additional BMPs on site and identify potential problems before they develop. And then keep thorough documentation. So you always want to have documentation, making sure that we are covering ourselves. Inspection reports, photographs, emails, exemptions, everything. Keep written documentation. With that, are there any questions for me, or we can jump? Yes, sir. So the question was the board threatening to, were the actions coming after the LRP, the contractor, who was getting the blame? And so We weren't actually into a full violation. It was kind of a courtesy, a heads up, but it went to the LRP, which was the county. And so everything is going to go back to the LRP regardless. Then it's up to the LRP to identify either through spec language or how they're managing their site, if it's getting passed back to the contractor, if they're taking responsibility, but everything is going to go back to the LRP. Yes, sir. Yeah, so the question was, how do we manage the site maps? BMPs are changing from time to time on construction sites. Can we use laminated maps? Do we have to redraft and print maps? So in my experience, the laminated maps is a great resource. You can print a blank map of the site and then go out there with dry erase markers and mark it up. Just make sure you're dating it and initialing it. The QSP will need to initial it, and just make sure that your BMPs that are deployed in the field match your map, because when the regional boards do come out to your site, they're going to look straight at the map, and then they're going to go tour the site. If there's something out of place, then they'll flag it. But yeah, it's totally up to you on how you want to implement. If you want to have the QSD or QSP draft something up, a hard copy, and throw it in the SWIP book, that's fine. But I think more cost efficient and cool way to do it is laminating the map, going out there and then updating it. All right, well, thank you. We'll turn it over to Robin here.
Thank you, Andrew. Yep. Hi, good afternoon. I know a lot of you, but I'm Robin LaMont. I'm with Orange County Parks, and I'm the NPDS coordinator for Orange County Parks. Prior to that, I was Orange County Public Works NPDS coordinator and a grading inspector prior to that. I'm just going to talk a little bit about municipal inspectors' responsibilities out on construction sites. A lot of the things that Andrew talked about, I'll repeat, so I'll try to go through that quickly, and I have a quick case study at the end. So the County of Orange Stormwater Program was designed for the county and all of the co-permittees, so all of the cities. And our program is designed to decrease or eliminate construction site discharges to our MS4 system. So our responsibility is to implement the County of Orange Stormwater Program. That will put us in compliance with our MS4 permits, along with if we have projects that are an acre or larger, we'll have to include the state general construction permit project requirements. And if your site requires dewatering, there'll be dewatering permits out there. Mainly, we're doing this to prevent the pollutants from getting into the creeks and the local rivers and then out to the ocean. And if you note, this little boy doesn't have any stormwater measures around his moat out there. So our inspection obligations vary from different types of projects depending on the size. But our MS4 permit obligates us to inspect at a frequency that's sufficient to ensure the sediment or pollutants are not getting into our MS4 permit. Our MS4 system. And if there is a violation to those, to that requirement, and we are noting BMP deficiencies, we're obligated to go out and inspect on a weekly basis until it is brought up to compliance. construction projects are not defined by the duration of the time they will be taking, but by the activities. And recently I've been hearing that projects that are less than a month, less than a couple months are not being inspected. However, the permits don't have that in there, that if it's less than a certain amount of time, they don't need to be inspected. It depends on what activity is being done on that construction site. You could have a 2-week project that is discharging cement materials, or has construction materials that are getting pollutants into the waterways, and that's still a violation. So it needs to be all construction sites, not depending on the time it's going to go. This is one of the slides that are in all of our the stormwater programs requirements, and one of the things that we don't talk about a lot is the waste and material management controls, which would be utilized in a boneyard or a storage area. So you're looking for secondary containment for supplies that are kept on site, and rebar or materials that can rust need to be kept up off the ground. It's the minimum controls for each construction site. And just like what Andrew was saying, part of what you need to do is have an open dialogue with the people that are in charge of the site on a daily basis, that are out there all the time, whether that's the superintendent, a foreman, or the QSP. You need to, at this time, we have our pre-wet season training in September, so that you know to get out there and take a look at your approved plans and make sure that they know what records need to be kept. If it's a construction general permit project, you're going to have rainfall data kept in the location where the SWEEPY is, and like the plans being laminated. I've had a lot of projects that will laminate it and then just take a picture and then wipe it down and keep a copy of the picture. Or they'll just make a stack of the original plan and draw on those, and then keep those folded up into the SWEEPY. What you want to be out there looking at now is where you will anticipate there to be drainage problems when the storm season does begin, and talk about those ahead of time so that you're on the same page as the construction superintendent. And we all know that when you get out there and you say, you know, we're at the beginning of the wet season, October 1st is coming, they put everything in place, but it's our job to make sure that you're going out there to make sure the maintenance is being done on the construction BMPs. So each jurisdiction has slightly different inspection coordination. With the county, we have NPDS coordinators which go out to inspect NPDS specifically. Some of the cities have just grading inspectors that do their NPDS inspection. Most of the time, there is a transfer of responsibilities with your building inspector or code enforcement. So it's a good idea prior to the wet season beginning to find out who's going to be out there and how you can coordinate communication between them. And earlier we were all talking about how oftentimes the QSP is working for the contractor. But if you can develop a good relationship, which I know it doesn't always happen, but at least have a way to communicate with them, whether it be email or phone calls, it's going to help everyone in the long run. And we all have those certain projects. It may be a developer that transfers from one project to the next, but we know that there's going to be those problem projects. You want to get out to them early, and you want to let them know that you're going to be out there looking at these things and making sure the things that they put in are being maintained. And know where each of your project's problem locations are, whether it be something like what Andrew was talking about. You've got a run-on that we need to make sure is going directly through the project and not infiltrating into the construction, or some type of problem that you can anticipate will occur if there is a rain event going through that project. And because we're into the second and third week of September, we want to start seeing that your projects are preparing for the wet season by getting stockpiled BMPs. A lot of times they can't be implemented all at the same time, but they should have measures available in the event of a forecasted rain event. So you'll start to see your inlets being protected and your storage areas and materials that are available to do that in the event of predicted rain. Looking at your ingress and egress, there are different requirements in different cities, but we know that tracking on and off of our projects is likely to have the public or possibly the regional board coming out to take a look at more things. We want to make sure that we're maintaining the stabilized construction entrances on the different types of projects you have. And waste management, again, is having enough materials to cover your stockpiles when it is necessary, whether it be rain or winds. And I have a few pictures of some larger projects that were outside of my jurisdiction, but were out there when the slopes are completed, even if it's not a month before the rainy season, you need to start getting them protected. So they have the combination of erosion controls and sediment controls with the bonded fiber matrix and fiber rolls and sediment controls at the bottom with the silt fence. We have a slope that was track walked, and then another area of the same project was being hydroseeded. And in order to get final notice of termination, you're going to have your landscaping in and established, so they can do the planting and then add the wood chips, which, as was mentioned, is an automatic final stabilization in your notice of termination. And I just quickly have a project here that during the last rainy season didn't have very good planning, and you don't want this to be in your jurisdiction and it get reported. So I'm going to briefly talk about one of Orange County Park's drainage repair projects. We have Orange County Public Works Construction Division working on it right now. The area that is in question was developed by the Irvine Company back in the 70s, and we were able to obtain one of these aerial maps that shows where the mass construction was going on. And a typical thing, the county accepts property from the Irvine Company in different deals, and about the late 80s, we accepted this piece of land, and later found out that the city of Newport Beach's catch basin drained through a 36-inch CMP, and the end of the drain was infiltrating into parkland, into a wide open trench. And that water was continuing through an open channel, and then it was going to tie into a 30-inch concrete-lined corrugated metal pipe. So this is the area where the water was just traveling through, and at high storms, it would go about 3/4 of the way up the bank and carry some of the wood debris and just the natural leaves and things, would head down the open air, or the open V gutter, and it would get to an area where the top of the pipe at the bluff was wide open. And when county park rangers took over this area, we had trails going through, and their number one thought was the safety of this open pipe. So they decided to put a chain link fence over it. At that time, it was in the early 90s, and they put this chain link fence over it, and the next few years of storm, the debris covered up the chain link, which covered up the pipe, and the water took its own direction to get down to the low point of the bluff, which is the Back Bay Drive. So the water eroded and created this giant gully and exposed the concrete-lined corrugated metal pipe. When about 2006, Environmental Resources staff, which was Watershed at that time, went out to take a look at it, they realized that we needed to repair the pipe and replace the slope. There was a year of large storms, and I think it was 2003, so they applied for FEMA money to get the project going, but were denied the money, so the project sat vacant and still for another few years. So the pipe continued to erode, and this was dry weather runoff that was dripping out of it on the right up there. And on the left, during the storm season, what was happening was the water that was still going through the big channel it created was carrying sediment down to the inlet that crossed the road. So this is just an extra picture of where the water comes down to the road and then where it exits. The sediment was building up and getting out onto the Back Bay Drive, and that was in, 2012, crossing over and getting to Upper Newport Bay, which is an environmentally sensitive area, 303 delisted for sediment. So at that time, both the county and the city were issued notice of termination, notice of violation by the Santa Ana Regional Board. We had a meeting at Parks offices, and we were told that not another teaspoon of sediment was to get into the Back Bay, and we needed to provide them with our plan of repair. In 2012, we got a contract to work on a new drainage plan, and we put in measures before each storm season until this year that looked like this. We were able to wrap the pipe, and this is my innovative BMP. It doesn't have to match a fact sheet, but it has to work. And we spent quite a bit of money putting these BMPs in for the next 4 years until we finally got a plan approved. During this time, we had to get Coastal Commission permits, Army Corps of Engineer permits, Fish and Wildlife permits, and continue moving forward with trying to get the project going. So when we calculated out the project, it turned out it was 1.12 acres, and we were going to have to apply for the construction general permit. And it was a risk level 2 because of its environmentally sensitive area it was draining towards. And a construction division, when they took it over, were getting ready to put it in the SMART system and decided to apply for a low erosivity waiver through the State Water Board, and they actually were issued the waiver pending that we could complete our construction by October 23rd. So we were planning to start our construction at the end of July, but when we did our bird monitoring survey, we found a bird. So that delayed the project again another 3 weeks. They did end up starting construction August 14th, and the contractor out there is doing a really good job trying to keep on schedule to get completed so we don't have to get a SWEPE with level 2 requirements. So I've been out there a few times. They implemented their perimeter controls, and they've had to contain the flow, which is really just dry weather runoff from the city storm drain pipe and into a basin area, and then they pump it into a water truck and use it for dust control. So my biggest concern is they don't have a SWEPE out there to go out there and enforce. They have an erosion and sediment control plan. So I'm just out there making sure none of our MS4 permit obligations are being violated. Right now, they have stockpiled materials and all of the BMPs necessary when the slope is completed to be implemented, but because the construction is across pretty much the entire site right now, we just have them stockpiled and are monitoring the rain events. And our downstream end is along Back Bay Drive, and they have the pipe that crosses under and goes directly into the bay blocked off and additional sediment controls in place. And the pipe that exits into the Back Bay, they are not allowed to work in the bay. Their Coastal Commission permit doesn't allow anything to be set into the bay, so this is a bridge they've created to put in their BMPs on the downstream side when they do line the pipe that goes underneath the Back Bay Drive. And just the last two things that I wanted to present to you guys is I get one of these publications called the Monthly Dirt, and the one that came out in March and April, was talking about how some of the Central Coast regional boards have come up with a way to encourage contractors to do the right thing. When they get a notice of violation, they're requiring LRPs, QSPs, the contractors, and some of the subcontractors to go to 2 or 4 hour trainings taught by our trainer of record from the state of California. I thought that was a pretty good idea to get them out there to learn a little bit more rather than just fine them. And also, if anyone needs any continuing education units, the Stormwater Awareness Week, which is a free way to see online through YouTube videos, that's coming up, and you can find that at Stormwater Awareness Week. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Brent Smith. I'm with the Amec Foster Wheeler. I was asked by Keith Linker, City of Anaheim, to present on like a city perspective of the construction programs. So the construction programs that the city deals with, they have the CIP projects that are greater than 1 acre that are covered under the Region 8 MS4 CIP Notice of Intent. They have the CIP projects that are less than 1 acre, road projects and things like that that still require the MS4 inspections. And then they have the private construction MS4 inspections as well. So I'll be going through some of those projects. A lot of the MS4 project or the CIP projects, they have a contracted QISP on site. So, a lot of the times the inspectors are really just providing the oversight, and I think that's pretty consistent with a lot of the other cities and county facilities, that really you're providing the oversight of the QSB, So you're really using your MS4 program to provide that oversight. You go out and go out at a frequency based on the MS4 permit to make sure that they're filling out their documentation and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be and doing your inspections based on that. We had a couple of projects that I'll just bring up just briefly. One of them, we had a project that we were providing oversight for. This isn't the city of Anaheim, but it's another project for the county that they had the sampling requirements. This was a risk level 2 site. The contractor ended up not having sample kits. They weren't really prepared to take the samples. They didn't have a field meter on site. The staff, they used a consultant to come in and do the sampling. So because they weren't prepared to take the samples, the developer ended up just putting little plastic cups all over the site with the runoff. So it's an example that you really need to make sure that the actual staff is prepared to actually take the samples on time, make sure they're taking their pH samples. Right after that happened, then they took the pH samples, and the pH readings were, they were impacted by an overflowing concrete waste area. So, and then it wasn't even uploaded to smarts on time. So just a catastrophe of errors that were going on. And so you want to make sure that they're actually implementing the BMPs that are assigned in their SWIPs and their erosion sediment control plans. Things are being uploaded in the proper time frame. If there are exceedances of your NALs, that you actually have that you research and figure out exactly where that source is coming from. It's easier to get those things taken care of immediately than wait till the annual report time and realize that they had an error. So a lot of this particular case, we caught this ahead of time, but you need to make sure, just because you hire a QSB doesn't mean that everything's being done correctly. You really do need to have oversight over these the QSBs. And it goes back to the city of San Diego on their $3.2 million fine settlement agreement. This is really important to make sure you have that proper oversight. So for the city of Anaheim, they have the checklist. They're evaluating the BMP effectiveness, verifying coverage. So that's all part of your inspection forms that you when you go out and do your inspection. One of the things that during one of the audits several years ago, the city, when the city was audited, they had the inspectors go out, and one of the findings was that when they did the inspection, that the site perimeter, when they did the site walk, the inspector didn't actually do the entire site walk. So that's also important, that when you're doing your BMP, your actual documented inspection, that you're going out and doing a full inspection. So a lot of the times the inspectors are out there all the time, but they're not doing their documented inspection per the stormwater MS4 permit requirements. So you're actually, make sure when you actually do that inspection that you're doing the full site walk, fully evaluate the BMPs and so forth. And then the other issue, what we have found in the recent time is the water quality management plans, to make sure that they're being protected during the construction phase. So during your BMP assessments, just really make sure that they're following the erosion sediment control plans, especially when you're evaluating private construction projects. That's really what you're evaluating. All right, they have an approved erosion sediment control plan. That's what you'd enforce on if they're not implementing the BMPs for that. So review that erosion sediment control plan and make sure that the BMPs are adequately implemented for that, in particular for the phase of construction that they're working on. So, and then there's going to be times that the contractors don't follow the erosion sediment control plan, so you have enforcement capability. Make sure that you clearly communicate your requirements. So give them the punch list of items, make sure that they're following those, follow up with written, either a written email or a written documentation at the time of your site visit to clearly convey what they're required to do. If you don't provide that punch list, you don't provide that documentation, that could be an issue where, you know, they'll say, oh, you didn't tell me that. You know, everybody's hurt. You know, you're going to have problems with them. So make sure that you have that written documentation. And then, as mentioned, the post-construction BMPs. These do get impacted. You know, the porous pavers do get impacted if you put them in the initial phases of the construction. So make sure you're putting some erosion, you know, make sure your erosion sediment controls actually are protecting the post-construction BMPs that you implement. This has been probably one of the bigger issues that we've found over the last few years with all the post-construction BMPs that we're putting in nowadays, that they'll put in the porous pavers in the initial phase of construction, and then they have all of the construction contractors driving over these BMPs. So in this particular example, they actually had, you know, they really did impact the pavers, and so they did some, we had them actually test to make sure that the pavers were actually not impacted. In this particular example, they did the following head test, and the water just stayed there. So example of during the construction phase, it's really, really important that you implement the proper erosion sediment controls, including protecting these BMPs that are especially the infiltration type devices. On this particular example, it was more cost effective for them to put in a dry well at the end instead of ripping out this whole BMP and starting over again. So some of the examples, they can put in the visqueen, and then they put in, you cover it up with just to hold down and protect the visqueen, put in some sediment over that, a rock over that they can drive over. And I think that's what some of the contractors have been doing. It's really up to the actual contractor to come up with their own plans. You don't want to provide that document. You know, if it's a contractor, they should be coming up with their own plan as far as what they need to do. We just need to make sure that they, during your pre-con meetings, actually go in and make sure that they're following the erosion sediment controls. Make sure that they know this is going to be an issue, especially for the post-construction BMPs at the end. And here's one last example. There's a modular wetland in a courtyard at apartment buildings that at the initial phase, they were covering it with plywood, and then afterwards, they came back and put in some really robust BMPs to protect the modular wetland during the construction phase. So what we found was during one of the phases of this construction, they wanted TCO, and so we found a lot of the sediment was already getting into the modular wetland system, so they cleaned that out, and then they really did do a good job of protecting it. So some examples of, you really do need to pay attention to these items and make sure that they're protected. And that is my short presentation of the city's perspective to get you out on time, and if anybody has questions, provide. Keep it short. If not,